Oh, hello there. I didn't see you come in. You know, I don't know why people open videos like that. Makes it nice and homey, I suppose. Yeah. Whatever. I'm Mark Kinney. You may know me from the All Games Considered podcast. A smaller percentage of you may be familiar with my writing work in the game industry, meager as it may be. Maybe some of you don't know and don't care, in which case we'll put you in the next cage and give you a drink. And if you get that joke, I believe we'll get along just fine. So, yeah. Gen Con starts tomorrow as I post this, and I'm not going. Instead, next week I should be posting the first full-fledged content episode of a little thing I'm trying to start called Those Crazy Games. You can think of this as an episode 0 if you want. If you want to be charitable, anyway. It's really more of a vlog to explain what I'm setting out to do. And as that goes, we should start with me. I've been gaming since 1983, thereabouts, so I've got a foot solidly in the old school side of RPGs and tiny bit of wargame experience in that realm as well. I also really enjoy a lot of the newer games and their innovations, even if they stretch the definition of role-playing game from time to time. These are among the reasons that I called my podcast All Games Considered. That, and it was a catchy name, and the A put it at the top of alphabetical lists, usually, unless somebody put an asterisk or a dash or something. Whatever. But yes, talking about all kinds of games from all those different realms was a deliberate decision that I made. I've had a part in writing a few things in the years before the podcast, namely an adventure in the In Your Face Again supplement for Feng Shui by Atlas Games, and a few character types in the Book of Archetypes for Eaton Studios' All Flesh Must Be Eaten. No, the necrophiliac was not one of them. And of course, a few years later, after the podcast started, I wrote a little thing called The Extraordinary Agents for Capera Publishing's Godsend Agenda RPG. The podcast itself covered games, gaming, gamers, all that kind of thing, news, issues, and of course reviews. And so, here I go today. A few years back, I encountered the online reviewer culture when Anim5 mentioned to us in the pregame banter of a session of the other podcast I was part of, the Gutter Skypes. You mentioned a reviewer called the Nostalgia Critic. And even then, I was kind of slow to catch on, but eventually I saw his show, and that led me to the Cinema Snob, Atop the Fourth Wall, the Spoonie Experiment, and other shows like that. Now, my reviews for All Games Considered were nothing like a lot of these. I would describe a product, give it my likes and dislikes, perceived strengths and weaknesses, that kind of thing, and hope that I gave people enough information to decide if they would like a given game or book or whatever. Watching these other ones, though, I got an itch. Games, gaming-related movies, I could do something with that. That was over a year ago, and I almost launched something along these lines back then, and in some ways I'm glad I didn't. I've had time to consider how I want to present things in this show, and of course, the name I was going to use got swept up by a big internet production company, so what can you do? Now, a lot of the shows that I mentioned before specialized in what some would call angry reviews, gleefully ripping into movies or comics or whatever of dubious quality. Now, this has a certain appeal to it, especially with some of the media that has grown up around the gaming scene. On the other hand, I know the Spoonie Experiment, while concentrating more on video games and wrestling lately, does touch on this stuff from time to time, And there was a show called The Foundry that I've been unable to find any sign of that covered some of this beat as well. On top of that, I do have friends in the industry, and one day I may be called upon to cover something one of them had something to do with. And hey, like I said, I've done a little work in the industry, so I get what it can be like to get targeted in that way. And there are other shows out there, though, that sort of light my path here, atop the fourth wall to a certain extent, but certainly shows like Todd in the Shadows, Brows Held High, some of Lindsay Ellis's latest work, that can be angry when it's called for, and I do want that opening, believe me. But they also analyze the thing that they're covering very well. And sometimes those actually turn out to be very good things. So, in short, I'll still highlight the positives about what I review, but I won't hesitate to light into the parts that deserve it. And believe me, some of them deserve it. And sometimes it's fun to just take something bad and rip it a new one. Mazes and Monsters, Dungeons and Dragons, I can probably name a few others. I'll be getting to some of those soon enough. So, what will I cover? Tabletop games, whether board games, war games, role-playing games, you know, even those new agey indie type games that defy categorization. They're back on this bookshelf. Even if they're not back on this bookshelf, I'll probably get to them eventually. Media involving or derived from tabletop gaming, or at least tangentially connectable. For example, there's at least one interactive movie that I'll be covering at some time or other, because it fits with all those choose-your-own plot books that were also big in the 80s. And there's quite a few of those. At least at first, this will not include movies and shows that people say are clearly gaming shows without even that tenuous link. People talk about, you know, Big Trouble in Little China, Buckaroo Banzai, and the like. Maybe when I run out of the other stuff, I'll consider it. But they keep making more. Books. I mentioned books a little bit earlier. A big maybe on that. I've got a bunch of gaming fiction in the AGC library that I saved on the off chance I'd get around to reading it again for this show. Now, given the amount of effort reading one of those would take, I'll have to see how the first few go to see if it's really worth it. But, you know, I've always wanted an excuse to read Cruel Doubt, so there we go. And at least until the end of 2015, I figure I'll go every other week with the so-called content episodes. Alternating weeks, I'll do vlogs like this one. You know, talk about background on myself or the show, current issues in gaming, perhaps, maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff, maybe some Q&A if there's enough interest. Until then, this is very much experimental and dependent upon your support, dear viewers, at least in feedback and patience, and especially the patience. I'm still kind of figuring out exactly how to set things up properly and really keep them going properly and looking good, and it's going to be some work. I don't know that I'm even going to think about something like Patreon or that kind of thing, at least until the end of the year. But, you know, if things go over like gangbusters here, we'll see what happens. I think that pretty much covers it. Hope you all return next week and check out our first official episode of those crazy games. Until then, keep on rolling crits.